The crystal wine glasses caught the light as I set them down on my mahogany dining table that crisp October evening. 15 years of Saturday dinners had worn smooth grooves in our family routine, but tonight felt different. My daughter-in-law Stephanie sat across from me with an expression I had never seen before, cold confidence radiating from her perfectly applied makeup and freshly highlighted blonde hair. My son David avoided my eyes, fidgeting with his napkin like a guilty child. Stephanie cleared her throat and delivered words that would have shattered most grandmothers. "Thanks for letting us live here rent-free for 15 years while you covered groceries, utilities, insurance, and repairs. I saved every penny from my job and just closed on our dream house across town. We are moving out next weekend and cutting all ties. Time for you to learn independence." I set down my fork, looked directly at Stephanie with a knowing smile, and responded calmly, "How wonderful, dear. I have news too." The silence that followed my response stretched like taffy between us. Stephanie's fork remained suspended halfway to her mouth, loaded with the herb-crusted salmon I had spent 2 hours preparing. David finally met my gaze, confusion clouding his brown eyes that once sparkled with boyish mischief. "What kind of news, Mom?" he asked, his voice carrying a tremor I hadn't heard since he was 12, and broke Mrs. Henderson's window with his baseball. I rose gracefully from my chair and walked to the antique sideboard that had belonged to my grandmother. My fingers traced the familiar carved roses on its surface before I opened the bottom drawer and retrieved a thick manila folder that had been waiting patiently for this moment. "Well, sweetheart," I began, returning to my seat and placing the folder deliberately beside my plate, "I suppose I should start by thanking you both for providing me with such an excellent education in financial planning and legal preparation." Stephanie's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in a frown. "What are you talking about, Lois?" "Oh, just that I have kept meticulous records of every single expense I have covered during your extended stay in my home." I opened the folder with the same care I might use to unwrap a precious gift. Mortgage payments, property taxes, homeowners insurance, utilities, groceries, medical bills when you both were between jobs, car repairs for that Honda you crashed into the mailbox, emergency dental work for little Emma, Christmas presents, birthday parties, family vacations to Disney World. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, we always meant to contribute more. Things were just tight. You know how it is." "Actually, David, I know exactly how it has been." I pulled out a calculator receipt that stretched nearly to the floor. $437,642.18. That is the total amount I have invested in your family's well-being over the past 15 years. Stephanie's face had drained of all color, making her foundation look orange against her now pale complexion. "You kept track of everything? Every grocery receipt from Harris Teeter, every electric bill from Duke Energy, every property tax payment to the county. Did you really think I wouldn't notice that neither of you has contributed a single dollar to household expenses since David got promoted to branch manager 3 years ago? Or that you haven't offered to help with utilities since you started your accounting position at Morrison & Associates 5 years ago?" I reached deeper into the folder and produced a bound document with official letterhead. "This is why I consulted with my attorney friend, Martha Whitfield, 6 months ago. She specializes in elder law and financial exploitation cases. Quite fascinating what she taught me about legal options for recovering costs and protecting oneself from being taken advantage of by family members." The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 o'clock, its deep tones seeming to underscore the gravity of the moment. Stephanie's hands had begun to tremble slightly, causing her water glass to clink against her engagement ring. "You hired a lawyer?" David's voice cracked like it had during his teenage years. "I consulted with a friend who happens to be an excellent attorney, yes. Martha has been very helpful in explaining my rights and options." I smiled warmly, as if discussing the weather. She was particularly interested when I mentioned the unusual financial arrangements in our household and the complete absence of any written agreements or contribution schedules. Stephanie found her voice, though it sounded strained. "This is ridiculous, Lois. We are family. Families help each other. You can't put a price on family." "You are absolutely right, dear. Families do help each other. The key word being each other." I pulled out another document, this one showing bank statements with highlighted entries. "Which is why I found it so curious that while I was helping you by covering every single household expense, You were able to save enough money to purchase a house. That requires quite a substantial down payment these days, doesn't it? David reached for his wineglass with shaking fingers. How much do you think we owe you, Mom? Oh, I don't think anything, sweetheart. I know exactly what the accounting shows. But the real question isn't about money at all. I closed the folder gently and looked at both of them with the same expression I had used when catching them in lies as children. The question is about honesty, respect, and what it means to be family. Stephanie's confident mask had completely slipped away, revealing something desperate underneath. What exactly are you saying, Lois? I am saying that I always suspected this day would come. Based on your increasingly entitled behavior and those secret phone calls about house hunting that I couldn't help but overhear when you thought I was napping in the garden. I folded my hands in my lap like a queen holding court. So I have been quietly making my own preparations for quite some time now. The color drained from David's face, as the implications of my words began to sink in. What kind of preparations? My smile grew wider, carrying 15 years of accumulated wisdom about the true nature of the people sitting across from me. Well, that brings us to the rest of my news. I opened the manila folder with the deliberate precision of a surgeon making the first incision. The papers inside were organized with colored tabs, each section representing a different aspect of the financial reality my family had been living in denial about for over a decade. Let me start with this, I said, pulling out a single sheet of paper that had been notarized and witnessed. Do you remember signing this family agreement when you moved in after your apartment fire 15 years ago? David leaned forward, squinting at the document, as if it might disappear if he looked hard enough. I remember signing something, but that was supposed to be temporary. Temporary, yes. The agreement clearly states that you would contribute to household expenses once you became financially stable. I ran my finger along a highlighted passage. According to your tax returns, which you have filed jointly from this address, you both achieved financial stability approximately 10 years ago when your combined income exceeded $60,000 annually. Stephanie snatched the paper from David's hands, scanning it frantically. This doesn't mean anything. It was just a formality. Family doesn't charge family rent. You are absolutely correct that family doesn't charge family rent. However, family also doesn't lie to friends and coworkers about their living arrangements. I produced a small digital recorder from the folder, the kind used for taking meeting notes. This contains a rather interesting conversation I had with your coworker Janet Patterson at the Whole Foods checkout line 6 months ago. I pressed the play button, and Janet's cheerful voice filled the dining room. Oh, Lois, you are so lucky to have Stephanie helping with your household expenses. She was just telling us at lunch how much she contributes to help keep your house running. It's wonderful how she takes care of you. The recorder clicked off, leaving a silence so complete I could hear the central heating system cycling on in the basement. Janet seemed to believe that you pay me rent and help with my expenses, Stephanie. She was quite impressed with your generosity toward your elderly mother-in-law. I tilted my head like a curious bird. How do you suppose she got that impression? Stephanie's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, like a fish gasping for air. That's not all, I continued, pulling out a thick stack of bank statements bound with a rubber band. These are copies of statements from 3 different banks, showing account balances and transaction histories. It took some effort to obtain these through legal channels, but Martha's connections in the financial industry proved quite helpful. David's face had gone ashen. You investigated our bank accounts? I hired a licensed private investigator named Robert Chen, who specializes in financial fraud cases, perfectly legal when there are concerns about potential elder abuse or financial exploitation. I removed the rubber band and spread the statements across the table like cards in a poker game. The results were quite illuminating. The numbers told a story that contradicted everything they had been saying about tight finances and struggling to save. Stephanie's checking account showed regular deposits from her accounting job at Morrison & Associates, but virtually no withdrawals for groceries, utilities, or household expenses. Her savings account balance made my eyes widen even when I saw it for the second time. $247,000, I read aloud from the most recent statement. That is significantly more than most people need for a house down payment, even in today's market. Stephanie's hands clenched into fists on the tablecloth. How dare you invade our privacy? You had no right. Actually, I had every right, when there was probable cause to suspect financial elder abuse. I opened a leather portfolio and removed several legal documents with official seals. These are court orders obtained through proper legal channels when concerns arise about vulnerable adults being exploited by family members. David stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Elder abuse? Mom, you are not being abused. We live together peacefully. Living peacefully, while systematically draining someone's resources under false pretenses, is actually a textbook example of financial elder abuse, according to the National Center on Elder Abuse. I quoted their definition from memory, having studied it extensively during my preparation. The unauthorized or improper use of an elderly person's resources by another individual, including family members. I pulled out another document that made both of them lean back in their chairs. This is the report from Mr. Haven. Chen's investigation, documenting not only your bank balances but also your spending patterns, employment verification, and credit reports. Did you know that both of your employers require financial disclosure and clean credit reports due to your positions in banking and accounting? The implication hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Stephanie worked as a senior accountant at a respected firm that managed finances for local businesses. David held a supervisory position at First National Bank. Both jobs required absolute financial integrity and transparency. What exactly are you threatening? Stephanie's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. I am not threatening anything, dear. I am simply sharing information that I felt compelled to gather in order to protect myself. I arranged the papers in neat stacks, each representing a different aspect of their deception. Though I must admit, I was surprised to discover the extent of the misrepresentations you have both made, not just to me, but to your friends, co-workers, and community. David reached across the table as if to grab the documents, but I calmly moved them out of his reach. Mom, whatever you think we have done, I don't think anything, David. I know exactly what you have done because I have 15 years of documentation proving it. I smiled with the same expression I had used when he was caught cheating on his spelling test in 3rd grade. The question now is what we are going to do about it. The grandfather clock chimed the half hour, marking the moment when their comfortable world of deception began to crumble around them. The most devastating papers in my folder were tucked beneath everything else, wrapped in a manila envelope marked attorney-client privilege. My hands remained steady as I broke the seal, though my heart ached for what I was about to reveal. Before I show you these documents, I want you both to understand that what you are about to see was obtained through legal discovery proceedings initiated by my attorney. I looked directly at my son, memorizing his face before it would change forever. Sometimes the most painful truths are also the most necessary ones. I spread across the table a series of printed text message conversations, each page time-stamped and verified by the mobile phone company's records department. The messages spanned the past 18 months, creating a timeline of betrayal that made my grandmother's china pattern blur through tears. I refused to shed. David's voice came out strangled. Those are private conversations between my wife and me. They were private until they became evidence in a potential criminal case. I pointed to the first page, dated 14 months earlier. This conversation occurred the evening after I mentioned that my arthritis was making it difficult to handle all the household maintenance alone. Stephanie's message appeared in black and white. The old woman is getting more pathetic every day. She actually asked if we could help with yard work since we live here for free. David's response made my chest tighten. She's so desperate for family. She'll never kick us out. We should milk this situation for at least another year before making our move. The silence in the dining room felt thick enough to cut with a knife. I turned to the next page, my voice remaining steady through sheer force of will. This exchange took place after I suggested we could formalize some kind of contribution arrangement for household expenses. I read aloud from their messages. Stephanie, can you believe she wants us to actually pay her? As if we haven't done her a favor by staying here and keeping her company. David, just agree to whatever and then ignore it. What's she going to do? Take her own son to court? David's face had turned the color of old newspaper. Mom, you have to understand the context. Oh, I understand the context perfectly. I turned several pages ahead to messages from just 3 months ago. Here's my personal favorite, from the evening after I cooked that elaborate birthday dinner for Emma's 13th birthday. The messages were even more brutal in their casual cruelty. David, Mom spent all day cooking like she's trying to win some grandmother award. It's actually embarrassing how hard she tries. Stephanie, at least she's useful for something. Free babysitting, free food, free house. We've probably saved $200,000 living here. David, more than that. I calculated our savings last month. We're at almost $250 now, plus the equity we would have lost to rent elsewhere. I set the papers down and looked at my son with eyes that had watched him take his first steps, celebrated his college graduation, and held him when his father died. You called me pathetic, David. You laughed about bleeding me dry. You calculated the exact dollar amount you were extracting from my life as if I were some kind of resource to be mined. Stephanie tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand with an authority that came from decades of teaching high school mathematics before my retirement. There's more. I turned to the final set of messages, dated just 6 weeks ago. This conversation took place the night after I had that dizzy spell, and you took me to the emergency room. The text thread revealed their discussion from the hospital waiting room. Stephanie, what if something actually happens to her? We need to make sure we're covered legally. David, I already looked into it. Since we don't have a formal rental agreement, we could claim we were caregivers. Might even be able to get paid through Medicare. Stephanie, smart. We should start documenting all the care we provide. Build a paper trail in case we need to justify our living situation later. My son's face crumpled as he realized I had seen their most calculating, coldest discussions about my vulnerability and their exploitation of it. But the most interesting discovery, I continued, reaching for a different folder entirely, came when Mr. Chen investigated your recent financial activities. I produced credit card statements that I had never seen before, each bearing my name and signature. These are accounts that were opened using my personal information and social security number. David's head snapped up, panic replacing shame in his expression. Mom, I can explain. Can you explain $15,000 in charges for electronics, vacation deposits, and luxury items? Can you explain how my signature appears on these applications when I never filled them out or authorized these accounts? I spread the statements across the table like evidence in a courtroom. Because my handwriting expert, Dr. Patricia Williams, from the university's forensic program, has a very clear opinion about these signatures. The forged signatures were obvious once pointed out by a professional. My natural handwriting flowed with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades grading papers and writing mathematical equations on blackboards. The signatures on the credit card applications showed hesitation marks and inconsistent letter formation that indicated someone attempting to copy an unfamiliar writing style. This crosses the line from financial elder abuse into felony fraud, I said quietly. Using someone else's identity to obtain credit accounts is a federal crime, regardless of whether that person is your mother. Stephanie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. We were going to pay those back. We just needed some temporary cash flow for the house down payment. Were you going to pay them back before or after you cut all ties and left me to live alone? I asked, my voice carrying the first edge of steel they had heard all evening. Because according to your earlier announcement, you plan to sever our relationship entirely starting next weekend. David buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with what might have been sobs or might have been fear. We never meant for it to go this far. Actually, according to your text messages, you meant for it to go exactly this far and possibly further. I gathered the evidence back into organized stacks, each representing a different aspect of their betrayal. You discussed timing your departure to maximize your savings extraction, calculated exactly how much money you could take before leaving, and planned your exit strategy down to the specific words you would use to justify abandoning me. The woman sitting across from me was no longer the daughter-in-law who had once helped me plant roses in the backyard or stayed up all night when little Emma had pneumonia. She had become a stranger wearing Stephanie's face, someone capable of systematic deception and calculated cruelty toward an elderly family member who had opened her home and heart to them. The question now, I said, closing the folders with deliberate finality, is whether you understand how completely your world is about to change. The leather portfolio I reached for next contained documents that would demonstrate just how thoroughly I had prepared for this confrontation. My fingers traced the gold-embossed logo of Williams, Martinez, and Associates, the most prestigious trust and estate law firm in our county. 3 months ago, I took Martha's advice, and met with senior partner Elizabeth Martinez about protecting my assets from potential financial exploitation. I opened the portfolio to reveal documents thick with legal language and official seals. The result was the creation of an irrevocable trust that now holds my home, savings, investment accounts, and all other significant assets. David looked up from his hands, confusion mixing with dawning dread. What does that mean exactly? It means that as of August 15th, I no longer technically own the assets that someone might try to claim through elder abuse, undue influence, or fraudulent legal actions. I pulled out a document titled Declaration of Trust and set it where they could both see it. The trust is managed by a board of 3 trustees: my attorney Martha, my financial advisor Robert Kim, and my longtime friend Dr. Patricia Williams from the university. Stephanie's voice came out as a croak. You put everything in a trust? Everything significant, yes. The house, my retirement accounts, my investment portfolio, even the antique jewelry that belonged to your great-grandmother, David. I smiled with satisfaction at their expressions of dawning horror. Which means that any attempts to claim financial compensation, force a sale of assets, or pursue legal action for repayment would be directed toward the trust, not toward me personally. I reached for another document that made both of them lean forward with sick fascination. But this is the really interesting part. Remember those credit card accounts that were opened using my forged signature? The ones with $15,000 in unauthorized charges? The police report I placed on the table carried the official letterhead of our county sheriff's department, complete with case number and investigating officer's signature. Detective Sarah Crawford from the Financial Crimes Unit has been building a case for the past 6 weeks. I read from the report summary: investigation into suspected identity theft, credit fraud, and elder financial abuse involving unauthorized use of victims' personal information and forged signatures on multiple financial documents. David's face had gone completely white. You filed criminal charges against us? I filed a complaint about the unauthorized use of my identity and forged signatures. Detective Crawford determined that the evidence supported formal criminal charges. I pulled out business cards and contact information that Detective Crawford had provided. She was particularly interested when I mentioned that both suspects work in positions requiring financial integrity and bonded insurance. Stephanie stood up so quickly her water glass tipped over, sending ice and liquid spreading across the mahogany table. Our jobs. Oh God, our jobs. Yes, that was Detective Crawford's primary concern as well. Apparently, employers in banking and accounting are required to be notified when their employees become subjects of fraud investigations. I calmly began moving papers away from the spreading water. Something about bonded positions and fiduciary responsibility. I retrieved a stack of towels from the kitchen, taking my time to let the implications settle in their minds. When I returned, both were sitting in stunned silence, watching water drip from the table edge onto the Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from my mother. Your respective human resources departments received notification letters yesterday, as required by law when bonded employees are under investigation for financial crimes. I began mopping up the water with methodical precision. First, National Bank and Morrison and Associates both have specific policies about employees who become subjects of criminal investigations. David's voice was barely audible. They'll suspend us pending investigation. Suspension with pay initially, according to Detective Crawford's explanation of standard procedure. But if charges are formally filed, I let the sentence hang unfinished while I wrung out the towels in the kitchen sink. When I returned to the dining room, Stephanie was frantically dialing her phone. The mortgage company. We have to call the mortgage company. Actually, you don't need to call them. They already know. I sat back down and pulled out another official document. Mortgage lenders are notified automatically when applicants become subjects of criminal fraud investigations, especially when those investigations involve the very type of financial dishonesty that makes someone an unacceptable lending risk. The document was a formal rejection letter from Premier Home Lending, dated that morning. I read the relevant passage aloud. Due to ongoing criminal investigation into charges of identity theft and financial fraud, we are unable to proceed with your mortgage application at this time. All earnest money and application fees will be returned according to the terms of your purchase agreement. Stephanie's phone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered onto the table. The house. We lost the house. You lost the house you thought you were buying. Yes. The sellers received notification this afternoon that your financing fell through due to criminal investigation concerns. I gathered the wet towels and stood to return them to the kitchen. I believe they plan to put it back on the market next week. When I returned, David was staring at the rejection letter, as if it might transform into something more hopeful through the power of his desperate gaze. There has to be something we can do to fix this, he pleaded, looking at me with the same expression he had worn at age 8 when he accidentally broke my favorite crystal vase. Actually, there is something you can do. I smiled with genuine warmth for the first time that evening. You can make better choices going forward. You can face the consequences of the choices you have already made. And you can learn from this experience about what it means to treat family with honesty and respect. Stephanie was scanning through her phone frantically. We need a lawyer. We need to fight this somehow. You are welcome to consult with an attorney, though I suspect most of your savings will be needed for legal fees and eventual restitution payments. I began clearing the dinner plates, stacking them with the same care I had used to stack the evidence of their betrayal. Detective Crawford mentioned that financial fraud cases typically require full repayment of stolen amounts, plus penalties and court costs. The grandfather clock chimed 9 o'clock, marking the end of their old life and the beginning of whatever would come next. I continued clearing the table with calm efficiency, leaving them to contemplate the ruins of their carefully constructed deception. The ironic thing, I said over my shoulder as I carried dishes toward the kitchen, is that if you had simply been honest about your financial situation and contributed fairly to household expenses, none of this would have been necessary. Their comfortable world of exploitation and entitlement had collapsed in the space of a single dinner conversation, but my work was far from finished. I returned from the kitchen carrying a fresh pot of coffee and 3 clean cups, as if we were simply continuing a pleasant family dinner conversation. The normalcy of the gesture seemed to unnerve them more than the legal documents had. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of sharing some information about our family situation with a few people in our community over the past several weeks. I poured coffee with steady hands while they watched in fascination and horror. I felt it was important to set the record straight about certain misrepresentations that had been circulating. Stephanie's voice was barely a whisper. What people? Well, let's start with your book club, shall we? I settled back into my chair and opened yet another folder, this one containing printed emails and response letters. I attended your monthly meeting at the library 3 weeks ago as a guest speaker. Martha Whitfield thought it would be therapeutic for me to share my experience with financial elder abuse in families. The color drained from Stephanie's face as she realized the implications. Her book club consisted of 12 professional women from around the county, including 2 bank executives, a real estate attorney, and the wife of our congressman. I brought copies of some of the documentation I've shown you tonight, along with those interesting text message conversations between you and David. I sipped my coffee, savoring both the rich flavor and Stephanie's expression of dawning horror. The ladies were quite shocked to learn that the generous, caring daughter-in-law they thought they knew was actually systematically exploiting her elderly mother-in-law while lying about paying rent and household expenses. I pulled out a group photo from the book club meeting, showing 12 women gathered around a conference table with serious expressions. Jennifer Martinez, the one who works at First National with David, was particularly interested in the financial fraud aspects of the situation. She mentioned that she would need to discuss the information with her compliance department. David's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't lift his coffee cup. "Mom, why would you do that?" "Because I realized that other elderly people in our community might be experiencing similar exploitation by family members, and I felt a responsibility to raise awareness about the warning signs." I turned to another section of the folder, which is why I also spoke with the congregation at St. Matthew's Episcopal during their senior ministry meeting. Stephanie made a choking sound. "The church knows?" Reverend Patricia Williams was very concerned about what she called a pattern of financial abuse disguised as family generosity. She asked permission to use our situation as a case study in their upcoming seminar about protecting seniors from exploitation. I showed them a printed program for an event titled Protecting Our Elders, Recognizing Financial Abuse in Families. The program listed me as a guest speaker, scheduled to share a personal story of financial exploitation and recovery with the entire congregation, plus invited guests from other local churches. That seminar is this coming Sunday, right after the 11 o'clock service. I believe about 200 people have registered to attend. I smiled warmly. Your names won't be mentioned directly, of course, but I think people will find the documented examples quite educational. I reached for another stack of papers. The most interesting responses came from your children's teachers and school administrators. I felt they should be aware of the family instability that might affect Emma and little Jake's emotional well-being. Stephanie jumped up from her chair, knocking it backward onto the floor. You contacted their school? I had a very productive meeting with Principal Robert Johnson and the school counselor, Mrs. Patricia Martinez. They were quite concerned about the potential impact on the children when they learned about the criminal investigation and the family's financial deception. I remained seated, speaking in the same calm tone I might use to discuss the weather. They've implemented a special monitoring program to ensure the children receive appropriate emotional support during this difficult transition. David finally found his voice. What kind of monitoring program? Weekly counseling sessions with the school psychologist, additional academic support if their grades begin to suffer due to family stress, and regular check-ins with trusted teachers who can watch for signs of emotional distress. I organized the school correspondence into a neat pile. Principal Johnson was particularly worried about what the children might have witnessed or overheard regarding their parents' attitudes toward family responsibility and honesty. I pulled out a handwritten note from Emma's English teacher, Mrs. Patricia Kim. Apparently, Emma wrote an essay last month about family values that raised some concerning questions about the messages she was receiving at home. The essay described how smart people find ways to live for free while making other people think they are generous. Stephanie sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Emma heard us talking. Children hear and absorb much more than adults realize, especially when adults become careless about private conversations in shared living spaces. I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. Which brings me to perhaps the most important conversation I had. With your parents, Stephanie. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the central heating cycling on again in the basement. I drove down to Richmond 2 weeks ago to have lunch with your mother and father. Such lovely people, by the way. Your mother served the most delicious crab cakes, and your father was eager to hear all about how you were doing up here. I paused to let the implications sink in. They were quite surprised to learn the truth about your living arrangements and financial situation. Stephanie's voice came out as a strangled whisper. You told my parents everything? I showed them the same documentation I've shared with you tonight. Your mother was particularly upset about the text messages where you called me pathetic and discussed bleeding me dry. I reached for another folder. She wrote you a letter that she asked me to deliver. The envelope was addressed to Stephanie in her mother's familiar handwriting, with personal and confidential written in careful script across the bottom. I placed it on the table between us. She also asked me to tell you that they were reconsidering their decision to leave the family beach house to you in their will. Apparently, they're concerned about entrusting valuable property to someone who has demonstrated such a pattern of financial dishonesty and disrespect toward elderly family members. Stephanie reached for the envelope with trembling fingers, but I continued speaking before she could open it. Your father was equally disturbed, particularly by the credit card fraud. He mentioned that his own father had experienced similar exploitation by family members during his final years, and that the experience had torn their family apart permanently. I watched her face carefully. He asked me to tell you that he was deeply ashamed of the person you had apparently become. The envelope slipped from Stephanie's fingers and fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird. She stared at it as if it contained a death sentence. But don't worry, I added with a bright smile. I also made sure to contact people who could help spread the word about your particular methods of exploitation so that other elderly community members could protect themselves from similar schemes. I pulled out a list of names and organizations: the County Council on Aging, the Better Business Bureau, the local chapter of AARP, and the Senior Center's Fraud Prevention Program all received detailed information about your techniques and warning signs that other families should watch for. David was now openly weeping, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. Mom, please. We can fix this. We can make it right somehow. Actually, David, that brings us to the final piece of information I need to share with you both. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I had spent so many peaceful hours over the years. Because while I was busy protecting our community from your methods of exploitation, I was also taking some additional steps to protect myself. The grandfather clock chimed the quarter hour, and I turned back to face them with a smile that carried 15 years of accumulated wisdom about who they really were underneath their masks of family loyalty. You see, I didn't just investigate your past behavior and present circumstances. I also took action to influence your future options in some very interesting ways. I returned to my seat at the head of the table, the position I had occupied for every family dinner, holiday meal, and important conversation for the past 15 years. Tonight, it felt less like a dining room chair and more like a throne from which I would deliver the final verdict in a case that had been building for over a decade. 6 weeks ago, I made what you might call a strategic real estate investment. I opened a final folder that contained documents I had been saving for this moment. It required some creative financing and assistance from my investment advisor, but I think you'll find the results quite interesting. The deed I placed on the table was official, notarized, and recorded with the county clerk's office. It showed the purchase of 1247 Magnolia Lane for $435,000 cash, paid through my irrevocable trust and completed on October 1st. David squinted at the address, his tears making it difficult to focus. That's our house. The house we were buying. Was your house? Past tense. It became my house when I outbid you by $50,000 and paid cash through a shell company managed by my trust attorneys. I smiled with genuine satisfaction. The sellers were quite pleased to accept an offer that didn't depend on financing approvals or criminal background checks. Stephanie's voice was barely audible. How did you even know about the house? Oh, my dear, I've known about your house hunting activities for almost 8 months. You discuss real estate options quite loudly during your evening phone calls, especially when you think I'm asleep in my bedroom. I pulled out printed real estate listings with handwritten notes in the margins. I've been tracking every property you visited, every offer you made, and every conversation you had with your real estate agent. I spread out additional documents showing multiple property purchases completed over the past 2 months. 1249 Magnolia Lane, the lot directly next to your dream house. 1251 Magnolia Lane, the corner lot that would have been perfect for building a custom home. And 1253 Magnolia Lane, the final available lot on that particular street. David stared at the deeds as if they might spontaneously combust. You bought 4 properties? I bought every piece of available real estate in the neighborhood you had chosen for your new life away from me. I organized the deeds in a neat row, which means that not only can't you buy the house you wanted, but you also can't build anywhere else in that area or live near the friends and school district you had selected for Emma and Jake. Stephanie was scrolling frantically through her phone. There have to be other houses, other neighborhoods. Certainly there are other options, assuming you can qualify for a mortgage while under criminal investigation for financial fraud. I pulled out a legal document that made both of them freeze. However, there's something else you should know about your current financial situation. The paper was a formal notice from Child Protective Services, requesting a home study and family financial assessment due to concerns about family instability, potential financial crimes, and children's exposure to inappropriate adult behavior regarding money and honesty. Mrs. Patricia Williams from the school contacted CPS when she became concerned about Emma's essay and some things Jake had mentioned to his teacher about keeping secrets from Grandma and moving away so nobody can find us. I smoothed the document with my palm. They're particularly interested in evaluating the children's living situation if their parents become convicted felons. David's head snapped up. They can't take our children. They won't take your children unless they determine that the home environment is unsuitable due to criminal activity or financial instability. I pulled out another document. However, they did express interest in alternative family placement options, particularly with relatives who could provide stable housing and financial security. The guardianship petition I placed on the table had been prepared by my attorney, but not yet filed with the family court. It requested temporary custody of Emma and Jake, pending the resolution of their parents' legal difficulties. Of course, I would only pursue this option if it became necessary for the children's well-being, I said gently. But CPS was quite interested to learn that I own a stable home, have clean finances, no criminal history, and a documented pattern of providing for the children's needs over many years. Stephanie was hyperventilating now, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. "You're trying to steal our children." "I'm trying to protect our children from the consequences of choices their parents made without considering how those choices might affect innocent family members." I reached across the table and touched her hand with genuine compassion. Emma and Jake didn't choose to be raised by parents who commit financial fraud and lie to their community. They deserve stability and honesty. I pulled out one final document that represented the culmination of months of careful planning. But here's the most interesting part of my real estate strategy. I'm prepared to offer you a choice that could solve many of these problems. The rental agreement was professionally prepared by my attorney, complete with standard lease terms, security deposit requirements, and monthly payment schedules. I will rent the house at 1247 Magnolia Lane to your family for fair market value, which is currently $2,800 per month. I pointed to the relevant section of the lease. The lease also includes provisions for you to make restitution payments for the financial fraud, community service requirements to rebuild your reputation, and mandatory family counseling to address the underlying issues that created this situation. David looked up with the first glimmer of hope I had seen in his eyes all evening. "You would let us rent from you?" "Under very specific conditions, yes." I pulled out a detailed contract that outlined those conditions. Monthly rent paid on time, full restitution of the stolen money over a 3-year period, public apology letters to everyone you lied to, 100 hours of community service, helping other elderly residents, and weekly family counseling sessions that include honest discussion about respect, honesty, and what it means to be family. Stephanie was reading the contract with desperate concentration. "And if we do all this? If you complete the program successfully, demonstrating genuine change and rebuilt trustworthiness, I will transfer ownership of the house to you at my original purchase price with no profit for myself." I smiled warmly. "Think of it as an opportunity to earn back not just a house, but your integrity and your children's respect." The silence stretched between us while they processed the magnitude of the choice I was offering. Genuine redemption through hard work and honesty, or continued consequences from their pattern of deception and exploitation. "However," I added, "if you choose to reject this offer and try to find alternatives on your own, you should know that your options are quite limited." I pulled out a map of our county with red marks indicating every property I had purchased or placed under contract through my various investment accounts. Over the past 2 months, I've acquired significant real estate holdings in most of the desirable neighborhoods, within reasonable commuting distance of your jobs, assuming you still have jobs after the criminal investigation concludes. The red marks covered nearly every area they might have considered for relocating their family. I've also spoken with several rental property management companies about your situation, since they typically run background checks on potential tenants. David stared at the map as if it were a declaration of war. "You've blocked us from living anywhere. I've created consequences for your choices, just as the legal system and your community have created consequences." I folded the map carefully. "But I've also provided a path forward that allows you to rebuild your lives with dignity and integrity, if you're willing to do the work." The grandfather clock chimed 10 o'clock, marking the end of their old life and the beginning of whatever they would choose to become. The power they thought they had seized through deception and exploitation now rested entirely in my hands, and I intended to use it wisely. "The choice is yours," I said, gathering my papers with the satisfaction of someone who had played a very long game and finally reached the end. "But you should know that this offer expires at midnight on Sunday, after I give my presentation at Street Matthews about recognizing and preventing financial elder abuse in families." Their comfortable world of entitlement and exploitation had been systematically dismantled, but redemption remained possible if they could find the courage to choose honesty over pride, responsibility over selfishness, and genuine family commitment over calculated exploitation. The question now was whether they were capable of becoming the people their children deserved to call parents, and the people I had once believed them to be. The grandfather clock had chimed 11 times before anyone spoke again. In that hour of silence, I watched David and Stephanie process the complete transformation of their reality, from exploiters to the exploited, from controllers to controlled, from those who held power to those whose future depended entirely on choices I would either accept or reject. When David finally spoke, his voice carried a humility I hadn't heard since he was a small boy, caught in a serious misdeed. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Of course, sweetheart. I've been telling the truth all evening. Why didn't you just kick us out years ago when you realized what we were doing?" His eyes were red from crying, but his gaze was direct and honest for the first time in months. "Why go through all this elaborate planning and documentation instead of just confronting us?" I set down my coffee cup and considered the question that went to the heart of everything that had happened between us. "Because simply kicking you out wouldn't have taught you anything about the real consequences of your choices. It wouldn't have protected other elderly people from similar exploitation. And it wouldn't have given you the opportunity to become better people." I walked to the sideboard and retrieved a photo album that had been resting there throughout dinner. "Do you remember when you were 12 and you stole $20 from my purse to buy that video game you wanted?" David nodded, confusion replacing some of the despair in his expression. "I could have simply taken the game away and grounded you. Instead, I made you work extra chores for a month to earn back the money, write a letter of apology, explaining what you had learned, and volunteer at the food bank to understand how stealing affects people who have less." I opened the album to a photo of young David handing out meals at the community kitchen. "Do you remember what you said after that experience?" "I said I never wanted to be someone who took things that didn't belong to me." His voice was barely audible. "Exactly. That experience taught you empathy, responsibility, and the satisfaction of earning something honestly." I turned the page to show photos of David's high school graduation, his college accomplishments, his wedding day. "I believed then that you had learned those lessons permanently. It took me far too long to accept that somewhere along the way, you had forgotten them." Stephanie looked up from the contract she had been studying obsessively. "But why offer us a way back? After everything we did, everything we said about you, why give us this chance?" "Because you are the parents of my grandchildren, and they deserve to see their parents choose integrity over convenience, honesty over deception, and family commitment over selfish exploitation." I sat back down across from them. "Emma and Jake have been watching your behavior and absorbing your values for years. What kind of adults will they become if they believe that family members exist to be used and discarded when they're no longer profitable?" I pulled out the letter from Emma's teacher and read a passage I had marked. When asked to write about someone she admired, Emma wrote about her grandmother who takes care of everyone even when they don't deserve it. When asked about her own goals, she wrote that she wanted to be smart like her parents and find people who will pay for everything so she doesn't have to work very hard. The words hung in the air like an indictment of everything they had taught their daughter through their behavior over the past 15 years. "Your children are learning from your example every single day," I continued. "They're learning whether family means mutual support and respect or exploitation and abandonment. They're learning whether honesty and hard work matter or whether cleverness and manipulation are more valuable. What do you want them to learn?" David reached across the table and took Stephanie's hand for the first time that evening. "We want them to learn the lessons we forgot. Then prove it." I pushed the rental contract and redemption program toward them, not with words, but with choices. Not with promises, but with consistent action over time. Show your children and your community what genuine accountability looks like. Stephanie picked up the pen that lay beside the contract. "If we sign this, if we do everything you're asking, how do we know you won't just change the terms or add new requirements? Because unlike you, I understand that family commitment means keeping promises even when it becomes inconvenient." I pulled out one final document. "This is a binding legal contract overseen by the family court and managed by neutral third parties. I can't change the terms any more than you can. If you fulfill your obligations, you earn the house and your redemption. If you don't, you face the full consequences we've discussed." I stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the garden where I had spent so many hours over the years thinking about family, legacy, and what really mattered in life. "I'm 72 years old," I said without turning around. "I've lived through a world war, raised children, buried a husband, taught thousands of students, and built a life based on principles that I thought I had passed on to my son. When I realized how wrong I had been about your values and character, I had two choices. I could accept the role of victim that you had assigned to me, or I could take control of the situation and try to salvage something meaningful from the wreckage. I turned back to face them. I chose to fight for my dignity, my financial security, and most importantly, for my grandchildren's future understanding of what family should really mean. The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet moments of shock and dismay. This silence carried weight, consideration, and the possibility of genuine change. "We'll sign," David said finally, his voice steady for the first time all evening. "We'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust and teach our children the right lessons." Stephanie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so ashamed of who we became. I don't know how we got so lost." "You got lost because you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource," I said gently. "But people can find their way back if they're willing to do the difficult work of examining their choices and changing their behavior." They signed the contract with hands that shook from emotion rather than fear, and I signed as well, sealing our agreement to attempt this difficult journey back toward being a real family. "The work starts tomorrow," I said, taking the signed papers to store in my folder. "The first requirement is a family meeting with Dr. Patricia Johnson, the therapist I've selected for our counseling sessions. She specializes in rebuilding trust after financial and emotional betrayal within families." Over the months that followed, I watched David and Stephanie struggle with the humbling process of facing their community after their public exposure, making regular restitution payments that required significant lifestyle changes, and participating in honest conversations about their behavior and motivations during weekly therapy sessions. Emma and Jake gradually began to understand that their parents' earlier attitudes about money and family responsibility had been wrong, and that the difficult work their parents were doing now represented the kind of integrity and accountability that would serve them well throughout their lives. The community service requirement led to some unexpected outcomes. David began volunteering regularly with the county's elder care program, helping other seniors with financial planning and home maintenance. Stephanie started teaching basic accounting and budgeting classes at the senior center, using her professional skills to help elderly residents protect themselves from financial exploitation. By the time they had completed 18 months of the program, something had fundamentally changed in our family dynamics. Our weekly dinners became genuine conversations rather than tense obligations. David and Stephanie began contributing ideas and effort to holiday planning rather than simply showing up to be served. The children started talking about their future goals in terms of how they could contribute to their family and community rather than what they could extract from others. On a warm spring evening, 2 years after that transformational dinner conversation, we gathered around the same mahogany table to sign the final documents transferring ownership of the house to David and Stephanie. Emma, now 15, had written an essay for her English class about what she had learned from watching her parents grow up during their 2 years of rebuilding trust and integrity. "I learned that making mistakes doesn't make you a bad person, but refusing to fix your mistakes does," she read aloud to us. "I learned that family means everyone takes care of everyone else, not just one person taking care of everybody. And I learned that my grandmother is the strongest person I know, because she figured out how to save our family when we didn't even know we needed saving." As I listened to my granddaughter speak with wisdom beyond her years, I reflected on the long journey we had traveled together from betrayal and exploitation to genuine love and mutual respect. The process had been painful for everyone involved, but it had taught us all essential lessons about accountability, forgiveness, and what it truly means to be family. That evening, as David and Stephanie prepared to spend their first night in the home they had finally earned through honest effort and genuine change, I realized that my elaborate plan had accomplished something more valuable than protecting my financial assets or punishing their bad behavior. It had given all of us the opportunity to become the kind of family we had always had the potential to be, if we were willing to do the difficult work of choosing integrity over convenience and love over exploitation. The grandfather clock chimed midnight as I turned off the lights in my own home, finally living alone as they had originally planned, but by choice rather than abandonment, and with the knowledge that real family bonds had been tested, broken, and rebuilt stronger than before. I hope my story resonates with anyone who has experienced betrayal by those they trusted most, or anyone who has had to make difficult choices about family relationships and personal boundaries. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when family members took advantage of your generosity? How did you find the strength to protect yourself while still leaving room for forgiveness and redemption? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own family struggles, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about resilience, family dynamics, and finding strength in difficult circumstances. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in navigating complicated family relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that it's never too late to choose dignity, demand, respect, and fight for the kind of relationships you truly deserve. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for family is to refuse to enable their worst behavior, even when that choice requires tremendous courage and careful planning. Take care of yourselves, and never forget that you have more power than you realize to shape the relationships in your life, regardless of your age or circumstances.